Refusal is one of the oldest instruments of power. It can look like conscience, or it can look like coercion. People have always walked away to signal discontent. Peasants abandoning a field, workers leaving a factory, customers boycotting a shop. At the other end of the hierarchy, rulers, patrons, and owners have wielded refusal from above, denying a charter, withholding protection, cutting off employment or distribution. Across history, the same gesture of withdrawal has been seen as both noble and destructive depending on whose hand holds it. Today, this ancient practice dominates public life in the form of boycotts and cancellations. Supporters hail boycotts as democratic voice, the many disciplining the few. Opponents call them lawless mob action, a coercive attempt to destroy livelihoods without due process. Supporters defend cancellations as the rightful exercise of autonomy by owners, managers, and platforms. Opponents denounce them as censorship, an abuse of gatekeeping power to silence dissent. The act itself, organized refusal, does not change. What changes is the language wrapped around it. This is the real puzzle. The same tool produces opposite judgments. When refusal flows upward, it is branded as collective accountability or mob intimidation. When refusal flows downward, it is branded as autonomy or censorship. Are these really two distinct phenomena? Or are they mirror images of a single mechanism whose legitimacy rises or falls with perspective? And if perspective is what changes, what does that reveal about the entanglement of power, principle, and self-interest whenever someone says, "We will not"? So, let's begin with the mechanism. A boycott and a cancellation. They're not really two distinct species, but actually one act-organized refusal. In both cases, a party withdraws participation to impose costs on a target. Think lost revenue, lost employment, lost distribution, lost reputation. We will not buy and we will not employ really differ only in the locus of decision. The structure, at its core, is coercion through exit. From this starting point, the debate changes shape. If the acts are structurally identical, why do they seem so morally opposed? It's because the arguments aren't truly about mechanics, they're about the rightful origin of refusal. When refusal flows upward, consumers or workers acting in concert, it gets cast as participatory. But when refusal flows downward, owners, managers, or regulators exercising veto, it gets cast as proprietary. The same instrument acquires opposite meanings depending on who plays it. The decisive difference isn't the act itself, but rather where it comes from. A boycott initiated by many is defended as public voice, a kind of dispersed check on concentrated power. A cancellation imposed by the few is defended as autonomy, the prerogative of property holders to associate or not associate as they choose. Each framing assigns moral value by source, not by structure. Mass refusals. They're often seen as noble when viewed through this participatory lens. Meanwhile, elite refusals are also seen as noble, but through a proprietary lens. It's interesting, isn't it? The symmetry becomes quite apparent when each side flips its judgment the moment the origin shifts. Refusals, they always seem to operate within the same triad: self-interest, control, and harm. You see, whoever initiates the act, whether it's workers, consumers, managers, or owners, they do so first out of self-interest. It's about defending values, reputations, or maybe even material standing. That self-interest is enacted through control. By closing off access to those choke points of participation, distribution, or employment, they execute that control. And then the closure, it produces harm. It might be dispersed as economic loss to a company or concentrated as the abrupt end of a livelihood. The circuit, it's stable, self-interest motivates, control executes, and harm follows. The dispute, it arises not because this cycle differs, but because the vocabulary attached to it changes with perspective. Boycotts, they're narrated as collective expression, a way for the many to discipline the few. On the other hand, cancellations, they're narrated as autonomous choice, the prerogative of the few to exclude. Each side, they describe their own refusal as principle, while casting the others as repression. yet both are traversing the same sequence of interest, control, and consequence. This is why judgments invert so quickly. When a boycott gains control of a choke point, it is recast as censorship. When a cancellation is cheered by a crowd, it is recast as mob rule. The mirror holds because the underlying triad never changes, only the vantage point from which it is viewed. Refusals differ in how they unfold. Boycotts are diffuse and cumulative. They gather force gradually, as participation grows and the costs mount over time. Cancellations, by contrast, are concentrated and immediate. A single decision by a manager, publisher, or platform can terminate a livelihood overnight. This difference in tempo, slow aggregation versus sudden edict, shapes perception. Boycotts appear deliberative while cancellations appear abrupt, yet both are structurally the same, refusal backed by coercive effect. Where refusal occurs in the value chain also matters. Elites control upstream choke points, employment, publication, funding, distribution. Masses exert power at the downstream end, consumption, attention, participation. Because choke points are fewer and thicker, elite refusals often appear systemic and harder to escape. Mass refusals, dispersed among many actors, seem more reversible. What looks like a moral difference is often just an artifact of where the refusal is lodged. Refusals also diverge in reversibility. A consumer boycott may fade if enthusiasm wanes, allowing the target to recover. But an elite cancellation can be final. Employment ended, contracts terminated, distribution removed. Both boycotts and cancellations are attempts to enforce norms by exclusion. The difference lies in branding. Boycotts present themselves as norm contestation, insurgent challenges to entrench power. Cancellations present themselves as norm enforcement, guardianship of standards or reputations. Each claims necessity. Boycotts are framed as holding elites accountable, while cancellations are framed as defending communities against harm. Yet, the roles can reverse easily. A movement that captures a choke point quickly shifts from contestation to enforcement, and an institution seeking public legitimacy may advertise its enforcement as accountability to the crowd. Actors rarely hold consistently to either frame because identity and interest are always intertwined. Workers and consumers, they tend to identify with the public, so they see boycotts as a kind of democratic expression. On the other hand, owners and managers, they identify with property, so they see cancellations as their rightful autonomy. Each side interprets its own refusal as principled, and the others as tyrannical. This identity attachment, it turns what could be just a contest of interests into a contest of principles, making sure that this mirror effect sticks around. Refusal, actually, gains its power not just through direct cost, but also, interestingly, through expectation. A publicized boycott, you see, makes it common knowledge that continued consumption is risky, so more people end up joining in. Likewise, a publicized cancellation makes it clear that association is dangerous, so more institutions follow suit. Both of these work by shifting thresholds. Folks act once they believe enough others will do the same. Visibility, in this case, really amplifies coercion, whether the refusal is participatory or proprietary. Debates, more often than not, pivot to rights language. Supporters of boycotts describe them as speech, a form of expressive political participation. Meanwhile, supporters of cancellations see them as association, the right not to be compelled into relationships they reject. Yet when you look closely, that distinction just collapses. Public disassociation is expressive precisely because it's associative, but in the negative. To frame one liberty as exhaustive and dismiss the other is to double count the same act in different registers. At this point, the symmetry is just undeniable. Boycotts and cancellations are really the same act, structured through withdrawal, yet cloaked in rival languages of legitimacy. Participatory logic sanctifies the many. Proprietary logic sanctifies the few. Each has clarity in the abstract, but neither can persuade the other in practice. The divide isn't a misunderstanding to be corrected by better reasoning. It's a clash of fundamental values, collective voice versus individual autonomy, plural accountability versus property control, and honestly, no amount of elegance in argument can bridge that chasm. This is why public disputes over refusal so quickly collapse into accusations of hypocrisy. When one side invokes democracy, the other hears mob rule. When one side invokes autonomy, the other hears censorship. Each side has reasons, but those reasons are always pre-committed to a preferred origin of legitimacy. The rhetoric is window dressing, the real driver is self-interest. A refusal is celebrated when it protects one's camp, and condemned when it harms it. If self-interest is the true determinative factor, what does that imply for judgment? It implies that any attempt to defend a refusal as principled must be treated with suspicion. The principle is almost always chosen after the fact to dignify the outcome one already desired. The alternative is deceptively simple. Act in the interest of others, but even this path is fraught, for no one can know the interests of others better than they know them themselves. To presume so is only another mask for control. The only safe ground is to respect the autonomy of others to choose for themselves. One may present a perspective, make a case, and explain why one acts as one does, but one cannot demand that others adopt the same view. The refusal that compels others to bend to one's claimed principle merely replicates the coercion it seeks to resist. In the end, boycotts and cancellations reveal less about democratic virtue or proprietary right than about the inescapable entanglement of power and interest. Their rhetoric will always be mirrors, flattering those who look into them and distorting those who do not. The mature response is not to declare one mirror truer than the other, but to step back and acknowledge the reflection for what it is, a portrait of self-interest dressed as principle. If there is a way to judge whether a refusal is good, it lies not in claiming the higher principle, but in letting others choose theirs. One may speak, one may refuse, one may dissent, but having spoken, one must also let go. Only there, in the relinquishment of compulsion, is there any hope of escaping the cycle of mirrored accusations and returning the act of refusal to something other than a weapon.